thank you so much. It's my first time here, both in the Royal Geographical Society and at the event, so very, very exciting. It's been an amazing day, really, really inspiring stuff. And I've come from the Netherlands, where we've, over the last 6 years, have been piloting and scaling an approach to bring that social impact into the ocean and especially coastal restoration space. So I think it's really about, hopefully, being able to kind of explain to you how we've set it up, how it works, and also, learn a little bit from you from this UK context. So the Sea Ranger service, it's set up as a social enterprise. That means it's a business, but it is fully owned by a charity. So we're impact focused. Any profits flow back into our work. And as the name suggests, the Sea Ranger service, a new profession called the Sea Ranger, is essentially what we developed back in 2016. And it sort of does two things at the same time. On the one hand, young people are guided into an entry-level maritime training track. So during 1 year, you work as a Sea Ranger, you build up your sea time, you essentially become a qualified seafarer, and we then connect you with other employers after a year. Secondly, while you're training with us for a year, then Sea Rangers carry out all types of nature restoration, monitoring, surveying type tasks, and we are contracted for that work. So I'll show you a few examples in a moment. They really bring that capacity, you could say. Now, and essentially the status quo, I guess, we look to tackle is, on the one hand, the capacity need to train people, to have people out in the fields, boots on the ground, to really, ultimately implement many of the ambitions around coastal restorations. Secondly, that in many of the deprived areas we work, there are really high rates of youth unemployment. But sort of conversely, at the same time, the offshore industry is really looking for young people and is in essence struggling to find young talent to go into those sectors. So could these essentially act as each other's solutions? That's essentially what we work to find out in the last few years. Every year we run special boot camp trainings. These are run by veterans from both the Royal Navy and the Royal Netherlands Navy. It's not because we're training soldiers, but it is when ultimately you work on a relatively small ship in the middle of winter on the North Sea. I'm sure there's some of you in the room, I don't have to explain that level of structure and discipline is important. In a safe learning environment, young people really, kind of meeting those boundaries. When you're under pressure in a team, like how do you respond? Like this is something we very much look at. So very strong focus on personal development, on seeing how do young people reflect on their own kind of behaviors, what do they take away from this? And that ultimately means you're working towards a social impact. You're helping prepare people to potentially also go into those maritime career tracks. Now, as we're preparing young people for seafaring careers, globally speaking, only 1% of seafarers are women. And in our case, the last 6 years, just over 1,000 applicants, 72% have been young women. So we see a huge shift in terms of biodiversity with a more purposeful role, working on that personal development, and also having ships where it is a safe working and learning environment. So those Sea Rangers do the work while they're learning, while they're being trained. And currently we also have under development, about to launch in the Netherlands, an actual NVQ course, so also training people actually through a government approved curriculum. Now, so that's the social side. The technical innovation is that we do all this work with special sailing vessels. However, sailing vessels that meet all the industry requirements to be classed as offshore work vessels. And that means that the type of work where traditionally government agencies have to contract commercial firms, we can do this under the power of wind, under the same industry standards. So this is a ship under class, and all types of surveying, monitoring work, even hydrographic surveying is what we carry out with this type of ship. So these sailing work vessels, it means we're cutting fuel use, we're cutting emissions, and suddenly for a government agency, we can be out there doing the work cleaner, cheaper, and with social impacts, because we're training young people that then even are attracted into those same agencies as young talent. So it's a win-win in that regard. And back in 2016, when we started this initiative, there wasn't really a sailing ship that could meet these requirements. So we set up a non-profit shipbuilding company, and over the last few years, working with naval architects, we've essentially have been building these vessels. And this is a photo of a new vessel that's about to come into operation this year. And it's not government subsidies or philanthropic funds, it's a bank that has financed the construction of this vessel. And that for us is very important because it means scalability. It means there is a financial regenerative model in how, as a social enterprise, we raise revenue from the work and how we can scale capacity. We can have more of these vessels built in future. Back in 2018, we signed our first government contract. This is with one of the Dutch government ministers. And ever since then, these Sea Rangers work at sea full-time. They work 2 weeks on the ship, and then after 2 weeks, a new group of Sea Rangers comes on. In the early days, it was simple plastic research that we carried out for the Dutch Research Institute NUOS. Quite quickly, we would monitor marine protected areas, also contracted by the Dutch Fisheries Authority. Different types of ground truthing, where satellites pass over and look at chlorophyll levels in the ocean. Suddenly, Sea Rangers could go out for 12-day trips, do the validation sampling, and just being able to do more, collect more data points with the budget that also government agencies have available. Another example is drones. We operate various drones around the port of Rotterdam, where Sea Rangers are contracted to track if container ships actually have their containers properly lashed. It's a big problem with not properly lashing containers, them falling overboard. How can you increase essentially inspection capacity? And then the agency would contract us. Sea Rangers are trained for this work. Other example is hydrographic surveying. I mean, amazing to do this with a sailing vessel, in this case looking at different shipwrecks, and being able to, compared to motorized vessels, suddenly able to do this under the power of wind. And then, having done this work with the vessels, 2 years ago, a number of universities, including Swansea University and also organizations like Project Seagrass, reached out and said, couldn't we train these Sea Rangers to really help us scale the seagrass restoration work? And ever since then, since 2023, since 2 years ago, we have been employing and contracting people full-time for seagrass restoration, suddenly able to bring this to a much larger scale. And it's been very powerful not just to train people academically, but train them vocationally. Again, being those boots on the ground, doing this type of work. So over the last 5-6 years, we serviced 20 government contracts, 17 of which was the first time ever that those agencies externally contracted this work. And now also the first contracted work in the offshore wind industry and others, where really those Sea Rangers are starting to really make that sort of impact. Over the last year, we then replicated this approach in the UK. And where this social impact to us would count most was in Port Talbot in South Wales, where the steel factory closed last year. A lot of jobs gone. And we've been training and actively employing young people in this region. And because the Crown Estate was able to contract us for offshore pre-development surveys for the floating wind development in the Celtic Sea, that also meant when we approached local authorities to help with this program, we didn't ask for funding. We just came in and asked them, how can we create jobs for young people? So there's been a huge sort of momentum built with local authorities that is just focused on engaging and supporting young people. Not to volunteer, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with volunteering, but paying a living wage, building a career opportunity, and making that really tangible. When we did the initial selection day for one of the boot camps last year, February, early morning, in South Wales, very cold, rainy, 2 hours before we were starting, I stand and I see at the gates someone standing, young girl, short, rucksack, early morning, and I just say, "Are you here for the Sea Ranger thing?" And she goes on to explain that her mother talked to her auntie who heard about this on the radio. And she just spent 2 hours on a Sunday morning coming on public buses from deep within the Welsh valleys to kind of make sure she's there on time. For her, this is her opportunity, her way out. And I think when ocean restoration work has this kind of social impact and it becomes a human interest story, suddenly, it's a different narrative, and it can get a lot of other partners engaged and involved where we need their political backing and we need their financial support to make that work possible. So, from our perspective, there is quite a big green skills gap, and we need capacity. So what better way than to really appeal to young people and their intrinsic motivation to act for the future, to make a difference, but really training and employing them and giving them opportunities as young professionals. And we believe that really gives genuine hope for a better future. Thank you.